Good morning, breakfast with bacon fans. Very rarely do I get a guest that has me excited. Up until that point, I'm waiting to have this guest on the show, and today's guest is one of those. It is author John Clark. He's the author of this book that I have been reading every single word. Betrayed Without a Kiss. What's the tagline? Defending marriage after years of failed leadership in the church. John Clark is a prolific writer from everything from the Seton Home Study course, John.
Yes.
See, you
Seton
have
Home
over
study courses,
1,000
yes.
students in one class right there. He's written over 500 blog articles for the National Catholic Register. He has written several books. And what are the other things? Because I'm not trying to make you arrogant. I'm just trying to make sure my people know you're a fantastic writer.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. I appreciate that. So I'm a ghostwriter. I've written for different political clients for their speeches. I can't really go into a lot of detail. One of the things is my life kind of sort of sounds made up because when you're a ghostwriter, you can't tell people who your clients are, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I think over 500 pieces for the National. So total between National Catholic Register, Magis Center, Seton Magazine, places like that. So yeah, I'm kind of out there these days. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm just excited. Okay, let me just start with this. Why marriage? I can tell you why I started down the marriage field. Why you? Why marriage?
Right. So as I've mentioned to people, and it's a question I've gotten pretty frequently because I'm in a happy marriage. I have often said that I've had a crush on my wife Lisa since Reagan was in office, and so people ask me that, like, why you're writing about like how do you view marriage to be in trouble? So basically, the genesis of this book is that probably about 4 years ago, a friend of mine came to me. His marriage was going through some trouble, looked like a divorce might be on the horizon. And knowing, not simply being a friend of mine, but realizing that I do write a lot about Catholic apologetics, he basically said, John, what's going on? Why are these things happening? What is the church doing to protect the marriage? Why isn't the church protecting marriage? And this book basically is the result of much of the research that I did in order to help my friend.
This book, John, this answers so many of the questions. So everyone knows I'm the marriage person too, right? I started my career. But just the beginning of the book, when you start talking about King Henry, and I had some pages marked here, but instead of going into it, but King Henry and the importance, it wasn't just like, oh, he just wanted another wife, but really explaining why when he got this marriage, how did he marry his second wife? How did he even bother? I mean, applying for an annulment, it helped make things make sense. How it then got hijacked at Church of England. How I was like, well, I'm just going to be the boss of me, which is just, the arrogance. But then, no offense to anyone who's not Catholic, but then that's the genesis of Protestantism. I want to make up my own rules. I don't like yours, and I really want to die on this hill. So can you take us a little bit to the King Henry thing? Because you were so articulate. This is one book I'm reading every single word of, and I want to digest it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So, over the course of the book, what I'm basically starting with, just to get to the Henry VIII part. So, what I was starting with is to try to answer the question, what is marriage? So, I start in Genesis, but then I talk about a time when people lay down their lives for marriage. That's real. Like, it seems so foreign to us now, but that's real. So essentially, King Henry VIII, married to Catherine of Aragon, who I'm hoping is canonized one day, and I'm meaning that literally. I think she should be canonized.
After reading, I agree.
Yeah, so Henry VIII decided that, well, history remembers it as she wasn't able to produce a son. Catherine of Aragon was not able to bear a son for King Henry, and obviously, in a monarchy, that's a pretty big deal. But I think that may have been somewhat of an excuse. It's hard to get in King Henry VIII's head, nor do I really want to. But what we do know is that maybe 5 or 6 years into his marriage, he was cheating on Catherine with some regularity, and that became, a pretty big scandal. And so basically, King Henry VIII wanted to get an annulment, so he applied for an annulment. History remembers that King Henry VIII wanted a divorce. That's true, but it's incomplete because King Henry first wanted an annulment. And at the time, most Catholics probably didn't even know the word annulment or finding of nullity or whatever word you'd want to use. They probably just didn't know. Who got an annulment?
Not a
So
divorce.
exactly. That's exactly it. So the idea that King Henry wanted one, King Henry was actually not fairly, he was extremely well schooled in Catholic theology and especially on matrimony. And so King Henry, before he fell, was a very devout Catholic. In fact, went to mass in some cases a couple times a day. I mean, daily mass. I mean, he was pretty Catholic. And so, in effect, what happened is that Rome looked at his didn't really have a formal application for annulment, certainly not the way we have now. But Henry VIII was very disappointed, let's put it that way, that the Pope wouldn't grant him an annulment. And because of that, he essentially started a new church. And, very predictably, his new church granted him an annulment. So, but to
He
your
made himself
point,
the head of the new church.
right, exactly. And so this was the issue. And so the link between the beginning of Protestantism and annulments and what became widespread divorce, they happened simultaneously. So we can say, how do we want to look at that in a way other than, well, this is a church that was essentially founded on divorce.
Read that already, but that didn't really even strike me. A church founded on divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that should be a meme someplace. Because it's exactly what it was. And then the people he had around him and yes men. Let's just go ahead and agree with this.
Correct.
Before we move on, though, I really would like for you to say why you think Catherine of Aragon should be a saint, because there's one particular scene in the book that I'm thinking of
Mm-hmm.
that makes me agree with you, and it's probably the same thing in your mind.
Well, in the
What?
book, I think I phrase it as she was born a princess and died a princess. And I think that Catherine of Aragon not only stood up for her marriage, she stood up for the sacrament of matrimony as well as anyone really can. Now, at the same, and I say that, I mean, the heroes and heroines of this era there were many English martyrs who died in defense of Christian marriage, but Thomas More, John Fisher, and Catherine of Aragon stand out pretty uniquely. Catherine of Aragon, after being mistreated by her husband for decades and being cheated on for decades, was faithful to him to the end, and prayed for him earnestly, even, it seems, until basically the moment of her death. Contrast that with King Henry VIII, who, when he heard about Catherine dying, threw a party at Greenwich. King Henry VIII literally threw a party after hearing about hearing about Catherine of Aragon's death. So you have really an incredible contrast between these two characters. And so Catherine of Aragon should be canonized, and she should be a patron saint of marriage. I think it's pretty clear, and I hope that Rome moves in that direction.
Did they even have her? Is there even a beginning of this? Is she even looking into the cause? Have they done that yet?
The cause has been brought up. I'm actually working on something too. I'm trying to pursue this to the extent that a layman can pursue it, because I think that we really need to look back and look back to a stage where people, what were they willing to do to protect marriage? And Catherine of Aragon, she's a heroine of marriage. So I hope that can happen. Sometimes canonizations take a very long time, but at least I hope that this book can bring her story to light, and people can look at her and realize how much she tried to guard matrimony.
The part that got me to agree is in my standards meetings, I'm always, one of the things I realize I teach my people is spiritual warfare. Your spouse has left you, he's cheating on you, he's even said, I never wanted you, flaunts it, blah, blah, blah. And when my standers humble themselves, they're like, I'm sorry for any way I've ever failed you. And I always say, never respond to hatred and anger with hatred and anger. That's just one of the rules. And so when your spouse is coming at you with nastiness and all you come back to them with is love, it befuddles the enemy. Satan doesn't know what to do with that. And so in the scene, in the court where the jury, the judge, the lawyers, she was mandated to get were appointed by King Henry. So that's not a stacked trial, right?
Right.
And before before it even begins. She comes in, and instead of sitting in the seat assigned to her, bows down before her husband. There's an act of obedience to the head of the family, and the
Hmm.
king honors both those roles, and begs him to not do this, and says, she, basically, I'm going to love you. I was trying to find it, but I'm going to love you, and I hope you do what is good and right. And so one of the things I learned from Jesus is that when the offended humbles himself before the offender,
Hmm.
there's no greater love. There's no way for the enemy to overcome that. And he didn't. He may have divorced her, but he
Hmm.
didn't overcome that. And I was like, wow. And that was public. That was a public act of humiliation.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, I was moved by that scene too, which is the cover of the book. So
Well,
that's
that
the
is
the
the
cover of the cover of the book is that the scene that is Catherine of Aragon and that is King Henry VIII, and that's why that's the cover. I thought, my publisher asked Tan Books wanted to know what I wanted for cover. I said it's right here because to me, because that's how moved I was by. I thought, you know what, if we can visually sum up what this book is about, yeah, that'll work. Catherine of Aragon. So yeah, I was moved too, and I'm glad that came through in the book. I appreciate
Oh,
that.
it did. It did. And I was like, I don't know what I would have done. Yeah. But in either case, okay, so you did start from the very beginning, and you had to make a solid case
Hmm.
for marriage. And it just, how it changed. It never, 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 ever was as it is now, ever before. And that moment was just the beginning of a watershed of sin and failure and offense against the church and against the sacrament of matrimony. Anyway,
That's
sorry.
right.
So okay, so looking at some of the things that you have, there is an assault on marriage, and you talk about the assault from without, which is society, and the assault from within, which is really the church,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
have to deal with that all the time. Can you talk about those? Why are we being assaulted from outside? That seems a little bit easier to understand,
Hmm.
because Satan, secularism, and Protestantism, then being assaulted from within. Touch on both of those.
So I'll start with the outside. So I probably could, in the book, I think I mentioned I could have talked about a dozen different things. But so I would start to preface that assault. I would start with this. You go back to the Garden of Eden. What is the serpent's temptation? What's he trying to do there? He's trying to break up a marriage. That's what he's trying to do. We often think this. I actually had to go back and study a little Hebrew on my part because the way that I had heard the story many times was is that Eve was alone in the garden. Adam just wasn't around. That's not what we learned by looking at the Hebrew. So Adam and Eve are both there. What was the serpent doing? The serpent was trying to break up what was which was a triangular relationship among God, Adam, and Eve. Okay. He wasn't trying to get Adam and Eve to divorce. He was trying to get Adam and Eve to divorce God. So the serpent's first temptation was for a couple in a marriage. Now, eventually, the idea would be, well, once you divorce God, you're going to end up divorcing each other, right? Now, he wouldn't have used that terminology. That's fine. But essentially, the key part there is the devil's first temptation was to break up a marriage. So fast forward to today. What's the devil's major temptation in society? I would
Marriage and
argue it's the
family.
same one. The devil does not have a lot of new ideas. He's still doing the same things, and they seem to be working. So that's the thing. So in any case, on to the temptations from without. So in the first instance, I look at pornography. We live in a pornographic society, and that hurts marriage, and it also hurts the whole process for deciding to marry. And I go into that in detail. I also look into radical feminism and the idea that being a wife and mother is basically a trap. I quote Betty Friedan at some length, and she compared the life of an American housewife to a concentration camp. By the way, that's offensive to everyone Who does that analogy not offend, right? So, but radical feminism. So I talk about that in there, and then the rejection of fatherhood, because it goes so hand in hand with radical feminism to just say, well, what good are men, right? And so I talk about that, and so men, the ideas is that the attack on fatherhood, to say people like me who has 9 kids, well, John, what are you really doing? If you're successful on Wall Street, that's cool. 9 kids, why aren't you at work, right? I mean, that's basically what we're told, right? So those are the 3 that I really focused on in terms of things from without. And I thought those were important. And I thought all of those were those are ongoing issues. Those aren't going away, unfortunately.
No,
Question
they're
is what we
not.
do about them. Right. So the
Yeah.
question is what we do about them.
And actually, before you do about the one within, how we're being attacked from within, let's actually kind of stick with this for a bit. Because you mentioned porneia, pornography. And I know in Matthew, Mark, and Luke that Jesus said, any man who divorces a wife is committing adultery. Boom. But I forgot which one is it? Is it Mark where he says, except for adultery, or is that Matthew? Except for the case of porneia. And Protestants are effusively saying that means you can get out. There's an adultery clause. Is there an adultery clause?
No, because the porneia would refer to a marriage which was never valid because of an ancestral relationship. That's
What's that mean?
clear. I mean,
so it's saying that you married someone too close in relationship, and
yes.
therefore that's porneia. And so unless the relationship was that, it's all valid.
That's correct. Adultery is not, well, again, and so we have, if we look back to, well, let's look at it this way. That's a really good question. So look at it this way. So we talked earlier about Protestantism and the divorce culture kind of happening at the same time. Yeah. So look at it this way. Henry never argued that he was an adulterer when he was trying to find ways, and I'm sure he was trying to find every different way he could find to try to get an annulment. He never made the argument that, hey, by the way, I've been committing adultery with every woman in England I can find for the last 15 years. That's not what he said. He used a rather obscure argument. But I talk about that a little bit in the book, but it's probably not worth talking about right here because it is a little bit obscure, but his argument that is. But essentially, if it were true that adultery would end a marriage, sure, he would just have said that. And in fact, so would everybody across. I mean, in other words, if it were as simple as that, people would simply say, yeah, I had an affair with the woman across town or across my village. Our marriage is over, right? I don't need to get an annulment, or it's sort of a automatic annulment. No one ever, I'm not aware of anybody ever making that case. I mean, not once. And so the idea that if Jesus meant it that way, that message would have been lost from the time prior to when the ink was dry on the Gospel of Matthew to the time of Martin Luther. It just simply wasn't that way, and people didn't take it. People did not generally take it to mean it that way. I mean, you probably, if you go back in history, did somebody take that in a certain way? Probably, but I mean, you can find, Gnosticism goes back to the 1st century. You have different heresies that go back. So there are heresies. People held heretical things, but the idea that adultery invalidated marriage was never seriously thought of by anybody who considered himself Catholic, and not as far as I mean, and if they did, it would have been a very small. You might, as I say, you could probably find a statement here, a statement there, but we're talking about something very new.
A cultural understanding, right?
Sure, exactly. And then again, if you look back at the original language, and it's so important to do that, that's clearly not what Jesus meant. He meant something like an ancestral relationship.
So when Protestants argue that one all the time, is there any way, if I did read the Hebrew, that we could prove that? Because they just say porneia could mean pornography, which could mean adultery, which means
well, it wouldn't be Hebrew because in this case it'd be in the New Testament. But the point is that no, when I was mentioning the Hebrew language is in reference to the book of Genesis.
Sorry, right. So it would have been Arabic.
That's okay. So if you look at the original language, by the way, going back to look at like the Latin Vulgate is a way to sort of get out of a lot of theological trouble, or what might get you into theological trouble, right? So you look at the angel's greeting to Mary. Look at the way that she is addressed. It's just so
It
it helps
answers a
to
lot
look
of
back.
questions.
It does. It helps to go back to original language, and so I would suggest that that people do that. But the whole idea that adultery would destroy the marriage, I, I would challenge people to find where was this widely held. When was this a widely held belief prior to the 16th century? Like who held it? So
So that's society. And then society, boy, because I mean, the human flesh, we all, I mean, even in a good marriage, there's time you get bored, right? And it becomes mundane. So we can understand how people will look for an escape clause,
mhm.
even in the boringest of marriages, right? That don't have any infidelity. And so society will constantly say, "Oh, go on, you deserve to be happy." Not even going to address that because that's not in the book and it's just kind of crazy. So we understand how society wants to accommodate you because if I
Mhm.
accommodate you, then I accommodate me when I'm in that
Mhm.
same situation, right? But I think the deeper problem is how marriage was attacked from within. And again, brilliant. I wish I could go, I was reading this going, which of these chapters did I really want to address? Because they're brilliant, they're in depth, they're clearly explained, and it's what we need right now because marriage is so misunderstood, or the institution of it. But within, how
Mhm.
was the institution of marriage attacked from within?
So I would go back to answer that question from modern times. I would go back to the late 1960s and look at the contraception problem. Well, you know what? Let's go back even a little bit further. So let's go back to the 30s, 40s, 50s when there was a Marxist infiltration of the church. And I know some people at home are listening and thinking, "What is he talking about? A Marxist infiltration?" This is all very well documented. The
Absolutely.
fact of the matter is
Congressional
that the
record.
exactly. So Paul Kengor did a story about Bella Dodd, and actually has a lot of these things, documented. The idea that Marxists were coming into the church for the purpose of destroying it. Now, so let's think about that a second, just sort of philosophically, and then we'll go. I'm going to fast forward about 3 decades. If the question is, well, why would they do that? Why would people infiltrate the church for the purpose of destroying it? Like, why would somebody do that? It just seems kind of wacky. Well, why would the serpent tempt Adam and Eve? Why did
Exactly.
Lucifer fall? Why does anybody commit any sin, right? But I think it's fairly clear that if you look back in the the communist literature, who was the big villain from through the lens of Lenin and Stalin? Who was the villain? The Catholic Church. It's no secret that Lenin treated the Catholic Church with unique ferocity. I mean, he hate so there's that. But so you had the infiltration of Marxism. So now I'm going to fast forward to late 1960s, where the big topic on the horizon was contraception. So by the late 1960s, there had been you have sort of had the Paul Ehrlichs of the world saying that when the world's overpopulated, we're going to run out of food. We can't fit this many people. It's funny because the numbers back then were so much lower than they are right now.
No.
And we just said happy birthday to the 8 billionth baby, which was pretty cool. I like that. But so the idea was, no, you can't be going around having babies. Like I have 9 kids, so I'd be a bad guy under the Paul Ehrlich scenario,
Just
right?
a kind of aside there. It's funny if we don't have enough food, and obesity has never been greater. It's like, you know what? If we don't have enough food, it's because you're eating it all yourself. We need to share.
Yeah, it's just it's sort of a
It's just
it's sort of a
silly. It's silly.
yeah, population control is a solution in search of a problem, I would say, right? But in any case, so contraception was on the fore. It was thought of as responsible parenthood. You see that term now, responsible parenting. Whenever I see that from clergy, I think, you're using, even if you mean that kind of in a good way, you're using the language of the left. That is not a good way to say it. But in any case, so you had Father Charles Curran, and some of your listeners may not be familiar with Father Curran, but I am. I have gray hair to prove it. So I do remember Father Curran was probably the most well-known priest in America. And when Humane Vitae was released, Father Curran came out. He taught at Catholic University of America. Father Curran came out within hours of the issuance of Humane Vitae, dissenting and saying no, contraception is fine. In effect, he was joined by hundreds of priests. He was joined by a lot of laity, but it was largely at first it was a very priestly run dissent. So you look back or you look, it's always been the case that the primary purpose of matrimony is the procreation and education of children. Primary purpose of marriage. Okay. So you've got Father Curran, who is the most well-known, or came to be at least the most well-known Catholic priest in America, saying, no, it's that's not it. We can't be doing this. People should have the right to do it. And the fact is, the church shouldn't have any say about this. So in effect, Father Curran was objecting to the purpose of marriage. And what should have happened was the Catholic University should have fired him. And I think they tried to. There was a whole book written about this. It goes through this whole saga. But in effect, he stayed on to teach at Catholic University for about 20 years. Finally, Cardinal Ratzinger at the CDF said he could no longer teach there. But 20 years is a long time. 20 years is a generation. It was 20 years of heresy, 20 years of dissent at the Pontifical Institute in Washington, D.C. Of course, that same school is where canon law is taught. See, in fact, it was the only place in America. It was the only place where canon law was taught. And by the way, Father Curran had. I did some research on this. He had articles printed in the Canon Law Society of America's official magazine. So you think, oh, okay, so the people in charge, the Canon Law Society of America, which essentially form a monopoly of canon lawyers, have who that is writing for them? So yeah, I would say when in terms of problems from within, I would say it started there. From there, the canon lawyers pushed for a change in what was called the American procedural norms. And I don't want to take too much time on this question, but I'll just leave it there and say that is where things really got bad. But philosophically, the table was set by objecting and dissenting against the primary purpose of marriage. And it's worth repeating. To dissent from Humane Vitae's primary purpose of marriage restatement is to dissent not only from Humane Vitae, it's to dissent from Casti Connubii, it's to dissent from the Council of Trent, it's to dissent from the Gospels, it's to dissent from Genesis. It's very clear even in Genesis, which is why I went back this far. It's very clear in Genesis that the primary purpose of marriage, I mean, overall, this is God's first command. The primary purpose of marriage is the procreation and education of children. It is to procreate and have babies. That's the primary purpose, and that was objected to. So that set the table about what was it going to come in the early 70s.
Might I interrupt right there? Because, it just occurred to me is the Bible also says in heaven, there will be no marriage nor taking of marriage. And basically, because the world will have been populated, there's no need for new life. And if it wasn't for the purpose of creating new life, it was just for the purpose of having fun, well, then why wouldn't it be allowed in heaven? But it's not allowed in heaven because it's no longer needed, because new life is no longer going to be created. So, if people would follow logical syllogisms, if they would just allow, but our flesh is so weak. Our desires are so, let me find something. Monsignor Mike McCarran once said to me when I was having difficulties in my marriage, I went to him and I was crying out and he said, look, a wolf in the woods that gets stuck in a trap will be in excruciating pain. He's got his leg stuck and he wants to get out. So he will often chew his leg off so that he can escape the pain. But then for the rest of his life, he walks around handicapped and crippled. And so it really stuck out with me going, this is just all of, humanity wanting to escape their pain. And we'll look for any excuse we can get. And, then there's the oh goodness, I teach this and why am I forgetting? Cognitive dissonance.
Hmm.
You know, if I can't make, if my actions don't match logic, well, then I'll go ahead and change logic to match my actions. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, we have the same. I mean, again, the devil just keeps repeating himself in terms of temptations, but the temptation is, look, you need to get married. You don't need to, just do what you want. That'll make you happy. Do we seem happier now? I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and I gotta say, and again, I'm 52, all right? I
You're
grew up
my
in the
junior, so you
80s.
can respect me.
So I grew up in the 80s, and you know what? People were friends with each other. People laughed. People could disagree, and they would still have a good time. People were authentically happy. I'm not saying it wasn't any depression in the 80s. I'm sure there was, right? I mean, we had the Cold War and those sort of things, right? Okay, that's real. And people had real problems. That's true. But my thinking, I look around now and think people are sad. People are depressed. I mean, people are, and I mean, I live in Florida, so I arguably in like one of the happiest parts of the whole world. I think it was a smart move to come here 3.5 years ago, which is a topic for, I guess, another time. But the point is that no, we do follow what we want, right? As a culture, we want to just do what we want to do. Are you happier for it? It just seems like people are miserable now, and I think
Right?
I think to your point, that's the sad. It's terribly sad.
It is. And so, yeah, so let me move on to another topic then. I'm really liking what's coming up even with the recent synod. They addressed the topic that you have addressed in here about what do you think? What does the Bible say about divorce or receiving the Eucharist if you are divorced or remarried?
Hmm.
Why should that matter?
Right. So I've got a lot in fact, I have an entire chapter called Come One, Come All about Eucharist for the divorced and remarried. And uh, the, you sort of, there seems to be I guess I would say it like this. In the church right now, there seems to be a push to get people back to communion, but the getting the divorced and remarried back seems more important than anyone else, right? In other words, we're not saying to maybe people that are in intact marriages, maybe they haven't been to mass in a long time or communion, but they're in otherwise in intact marriages. Where's the push to get them back? I'm not seeing it. I know that there is a Eucharistic revival going on right now, but here's my thinking: if a Eucharistic revival does not include or is not preceded by a matrimonial revival, it will bear very little fruit. Or worse, because if the idea is simply to get people back to communion, if that's it at any cost, that's a really bad idea. Because, again, I actually sort of take pride in the idea that I have very little original thought in this book. I'm simply going on what the church has always said and restating it for today. That's all I'm doing. Um, so how do we know that you shouldn't go to communion? Who was it that said you shouldn't go to communion if you're in a state of mortal sin?
That's
It's in
St.
St.
Paul.
Paul. It's
Yeah.
in St. Paul. And yet we seem to have forgotten that. The church has always maintained this.
You're eating and drinking your own condemnation if you go receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin.
That's right. So if I commit a mortal sin, I can't go to communion. Now, there's a saving grace, there's a saving sacrament. I can go to confession. That's right. And so, what? It's funny. I always tell my kids, when I go to confession and you see me in there, Father and I, we're not playing Scrabble. Like dad's work in progress too, right? And the thing about this is that if you have a Eucharistic revival, that again, I talked about a matrimonial one, how about a revival in the sacrament of penance? When is that talked about? And so, do we want people coming back to communion in the state of grace? Yes, 100%. Everyone should want every good person should want that. But the corollary to that is we shouldn't want people to come back in the state of mortal sin. What favor have we done them? right? And in this case, and I'm not in the business of reading hearts and judging hearts. That's not what I'm doing. But I will say that in the case of divorce and remarried, what we can say is that there's a scandal there, right? We know that there's scandal, and people who are not going for reasons that may have nothing to do with divorce and remarriage, maybe they have a different sin they have or something, right? They're going to start thinking, well, why can't I go? Sure, I got drunk last night. I've been, doing what I don't want to fill in the mortal sin, but you get the idea.
Right.
So
Well, then
why
why
aren't we
should
talking
those in
about
the gay unions be able to get theirs then too? Because
right? So
they're in
why are we
sin
talking
too.
exactly?
So,
And so I'm sorry, I was just say that why, one of the points I try to make from the beginning of this book to the end is this: there are 7 sacraments. Jesus, if we might say, drew this up, that they would be symbiotic. They're mutually supportive. You know, I've often mentioned that when I go to confession and come out with my sins absolved, my marriage is better for it. This morning, when my wife and I went to Mass, we went to communion, knelt down together, side by side, prayed to our Lord. Our marriage was better for it. Sacraments are symbiotic. The 7 sacraments are meant to go together. And when we start separating them and we start saying that they're, widespread, annulled, that's not helping. So that's where we are right now.
yeah, and it reminds me of this story. It may not sound like it connects, but it really does. I had read a long time ago the sales book. A man had these weird gems at his store that no one knew what they were, and he couldn't offload them. And so he
Hmm.
was going to drop the price on these weird gems. And
Hmm.
this a sales expert came in and said, no, 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 double the price. He's like, what? They won't buy them at this price. Why would they double them? He says, because if you show that something has value, everybody wants it. So he doubled the price. It was better than anything else in the store, and everyone started buying that gem.
Yep.
If we connect that to the Eucharist and the church, if we connect that to, if everybody can do it, then why have
Mhm.
it? If it's common, then no big deal. But we want something that has greater value. It's like, wait a minute, why can they have it and I can't? And it
Mhm.
might irritate me, but it will make me focus on what am I doing? We as a church, of course, we want everyone in heaven. So does Jesus, right? Definitely Jesus.
Mhm. Mhm.
But the idea of the mega church for the sake of numbers means nothing if, as you said, the heart isn't changed. We must change their hearts, or everyone's just going and it becomes meaningless.
It's true. I love the way you put that. And, the key thing too is we don't talk about scandal enough or have this idea of scandal. It used to be a thing, but we don't really talk about it anymore. We don't really think about the scandal that it causes people. And I talk about scandal a lot in the book to talk about, well, why is that something we should be concerned about? But, again, it's part of the scandal is institutional. So you have, you go back to the late 1960s. You had, I believe, it was under 350 annulments in one
He
year.
was
Two
338,
338.
338
There you go. And so thanks. So
in an
so a
entire
couple.
year in our country.
That's right. So yeah, just to restate that for your listeners. So in the late 1960s,
1971.
annually, you're talking about every diocese in all of America equals 338 annulments. All right. You fast forward a generation, you had over 72,000 annulments. She went from 338 to 72,000. Well, something happened. And you know what I find funny? And I guess because I just wrote a book about this, right? This is really front and center in my mind. But I think if you give people these numbers of, we went from 338 annulments to 72,000, marriages over 2 generations have gone from over 400,000 weddings per year to about 100,000. I'll be honest with you, I don't know why this isn't the topic in the church right now. What else is there? Because if we lose on marriage, what else matters? What? Okay, yeah, we lost marriage, but we won on fill in the blank. I don't know what it would be. I don't know. And so I don't know why this isn't. Why is this not the topic? I don't understand. And I'm saying this, by the way, as somebody who's in a happy marriage. I mean, as I say, that's my perspective, and I don't know what the logic would be, but it keeps going on, and to
Yeah, and all
very
the
little alarm.
studies, yeah, and all the studies show the detriment to the children, to the society. I mean, we're in a sinful world. We're coming closer to the end times every day,
Mhm.
and our mother said to the children at Fatima, the final battle before I come again, my son reigns, is for
Mhm.
marriage and the family. And if we're not there now, how much worse can it get? As you just said, more babies are being born outside of wedlock than within. More people are opting not to marry than to even marry. So then, if the annulments are so high, oh, that's pretty much everyone that seeks one. Anyway, so what do we do about this? What do we do? We can't give up. We can't say, well, let's just wait for Jesus to come in the end times. He'll be here and he'll fix it all up, which will be really
Right.
awesome when he does.
Right.
But what do you want us to do?
So within the church, I would say when I wrote this book, I had a lot of maybe quixotic hopes for it, what it could accomplish, and I guess I still have those in some measure.
What did you call them?
Quixotic, as in
Oh,
Don Quixote,
I
right?
got it.
The windmill
Okay.
tipping, right? So I would like to see just one change, just to get things started, and that's this. I want to see. So let me preface that change with pointing this out. In every diocese in America that I'm aware of, and I believe it's every diocese in America, before a couple can go in for an annulment hearing before a marriage tribunal, before they can even have a hearing, the couple must take in a completed civil divorce decree. So, unless you have been divorced civilly, and divorce is always civil, it's actually even not even that, and I'll come back to that in a second, but unless you could produce paperwork that says you have a civil divorce, you cannot have a hearing in a marriage tribunal. That has to be changed right away. Um,
It was legally canon law that you're supposed to file for an annulment before you can get the divorce. Isn't that canon law written that way?
so the word divorce isn't in canon law. And here's why. Um, when the state, so you have, I don't want to get too far afield, but you have natural marriage and you have sacramental marriage. So natural marriage can be, all right.
Two
Sacramental
atheists, two
marriage,
Jews, two Muslims.
sure.
Doesn't
So
matter.
you have two people. It's natural. You have a man and a woman. It's natural marriage. Okay. If those people go to the church, go to the government, whatever government they're in, and apply for a civil divorce, and the government grants it, that government is acting beyond its authority, because a government has no right to declare divorce for even a natural marriage. Forget a sacramental one for a minute. The government is acting beyond its authority to divorce them. The government does not have the authority. So in other words, let's say in the diocese of, I don't want to actually pick a real diocese.
Pick Fresno.
The diocese of we'll go with Fresno. That's fine. The diocese of Fresno. I was trying to think of like make believe land, but
Zimbabwe. I don't know. That's real too.
okay. So right there you go. So a diocese says, no, before we have the marriage tribunal, here's what we need you to do. In effect, this is what they're saying. We need you to hire lawyers on both sides, because in effect, that's what's going to happen. Because I believe the latest numbers I've heard is 70% of divorces in America are unwanted by one of the spouses.
Yeah.
So there's going to be at least one lawyer hired, maybe two. A contentious divorce in America right now is going to run you $150,000, right? You see these signs, divorce $99. Well, okay. But a contentious divorce in America is going to be $100,000. So here's what we need you to do. We need you to go to the state. We need you to go to the government. And we need you to file for divorce. We know it's going to cost you 6 figures. That's fine. No problem. Because they're not spending the money. Then we want you to ask the government to issue a decree that is beyond its authority. And only then, when we have that decree that is issued with that is beyond the government's authority, and after you've spent all this money, you probably maybe you've drained your 401k or your kid's college fund, whatever, come back, and only then will we have a marriage tribunal to determine if your marriage was valid. Okay, so a couple things can happen at that point. They could, I mean, it's in at least a handful of dioceses, 100% of applications are approved for annulment. 100%.
48, last statistics I heard, and this was about 5-year-old, if you took every diocese in America and lined them up based on the number of annulments approved, you'd have to go down 48 dioceses before you found anything that was less than 100%.
Right.
Isn't that devastating?
Well, I'll tell you what, yes, and I'll tell you something, that each of those dioceses has an office called Defender of the Bond. The job of the Defender of the Bond is to do, as the name implies, is to say, no, this is a real marriage. And you sort of wonder, what are they doing? I don't know what they're doing. What is it that the Defender of Bond, what are they defending? They've won no cases. What other
Fire
facet
them,
of
get a new
life?
person.
You know what that's like? It's like if the analogies abound, right?
Right.
What if you had a football team and you hired a coach and he hadn't won a game in 40 years? Are you going to keep him on your payroll? Why would you do that? And yet, for the Defender of the Bond, somebody's getting paid. So the idea that now in the book of Malachi, we know it reads, God hates divorce. So the church is saying, we want you to go do something that God hates, that the government doesn't have the authority to do, that is going to drain the finances of your family. We need you to do all that and then come back here, and only then will we determine whether your marriage is valid. But let's take the off chance that you're actually found, no, it's actually a valid marriage. You're good. Okay, now what do I do? Because now I'm civilly divorced. The husband and wife aren't getting along at this point. I mean, if you want to try to reconcile a marriage after divorce, it's a lot harder. Let's put it that way. I guess it could still be reconciled. Sure, that does happen. Of course it does. But it's so much harder at that point because the family, I said that 70% of the divorces involve one party that doesn't want the divorce. The number of children who didn't want the divorce, it's a lot higher than 70%.
Usually, 95% or more.
So you've heard the family. I mean, I know you've talked extensively about this, and so this is a major topic, as you mentioned. Layla Miller has written about this, the effects of divorce on families. It's devastating, and the church is mandating it. I'm sorry, the diocese of the church are mandating this happens. What part of scandal is that lacking? Because I can't think of one. So that has to be changed. If we're going to have hope for marriage in the future, that has to be changed. I'd start with that.
So much we can all do. I guess I could keep asking you about this because you do address it. Endless honeymoon, how the church can help married couples, how the laity can nourish marriages. And you know what, as a married couple, you're married, I'm married. What is one suggestion for how can we nourish our marriages? Because if we're not going to get fighting on the outside, let's start from inside to make sure we nourish them.
Yeah, so I do want to be hopeful. I really do, and I am hopeful. I think chapter 10 of this book is really, I think, a love letter to the sacrament of matrimony. And I think that if you're in a great, solid marriage, go to chapter 10. Maybe start the book. If you don't have time to read the whole book, go to chapter 10. I've got a lot in there. But to answer your question, there's just a couple of quick things I would say. I mentioned, going to daily mass. There are couples in trouble. They're not getting along as they once did, and go to daily mass every day for a month. I do believe that will turn many marriages around. I think it's that simple in many cases. Not in every case. Go to daily mass. Return to the sacrament. So go to confession. If you're not in the state of grace, and you're not receiving communion, you're not living a sacramental life. Come back to confession. Think about the story of the prodigal son. God ran out to the road. that's who God is for us. He's running onto the road to embrace us. He wants us back. And so we got to go to confession. We've got to go to the sacraments, pray with your family, say the rosary, um, do the things that were so common not all that long ago for Catholic families. Ask your parish priest to bless your home. When we moved down to Florida 3.5 years ago, it was one of the first things we tried to do is find a priest to bless our house. It's standard. It's a great thing to do, especially in an age that, frankly, and I know this is a topic you've been having on a lot with a lot of your guests, is demonic activity in the world right now. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna, lately I've started to read the Chaplet of Saint Michael, the chaplet. I have a real devotion to Saint Michael the Archangel. I have my house blessed. There's basic things you can do, but you have to realize that, look, if you're living in a society that hates marriage, and it does, our society is anti-marriage in large respect.
It is.
To get over the things that I talked about earlier in the book, we talked about the prevalence of pornography. It's a terrible thing. Develop a devotion to Mary, because, as so many of the saints have said, you can either have a devotion to Mary, or you can live a state of a really sinful life. You can't have both. So have a devotion to Mary. I mean, after all, she will crush his head, right? And so we need to, especially men, now both men and women, but especially men in a pornographic society, develop a devotion to Mary. I tell a little bit I think the story is in the book. I've mentioned this in my speaking, that years ago I read a book called The Mystical City of God. It's a private revelation that Mary appeared to Venerable Mary of Agreda, and it was just a story of Mary's life. I was maybe 35 pages into that book. It's a thick book. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's probably
A
600
phone book.
pages or it's right, exactly. It was
For
maybe
young
35
people,
pages.
those are things we used to have before Google.
It's exactly books, right? It was great. You get a library card. It was cool. But about 35 pages into the book, reading about the life of Our Lady, and Lisa came in and she said, "How do you like the book?" And I said, "Well, good news and bad news. The bad news is I'm falling in love with another woman. The good news is the other woman is Mary, and we have to be hers. The problem is, how do you get here where Mary, it couldn't be clearer in the Gospel of John that Mary loves marriage. When she said to Jesus, they have no wine, she knew that or she could at least, let's say, strongly suspect, but I think she knew that when she had said those words, if he did a miracle, then that begins his public life. It begins the road to the cross. She knew that. Marriage, and so by his public life beginning at a wedding, I mean, I don't know how many. It's sort of funny assembling this book. It was sort of funny, like, how are people not getting this, right? Like, so our Lord's public life begins.
John. That's the thing.
That's
we
true.
have to actively seek truth. And just like you and I can be blinded by our own sins, our own flaws, our own failings.
True.
I've been praying lately, Lord, help me to see my areas of flaw more than I've seen them before, because I don't want to judge my husband and my kids and neighbors. I'm like, Lord, let me see. But you have to have a contrite desire for that. And then once you start seeing it, then you can only improve it. And we don't want that. We want the blinders, because then we don't have any need or overt proof to change our actions.
It's a great point, Christine. I'm glad you make it. I mean, I've certainly had those times too, and I'm sure we all have those blind spots where you're right. You have to get on your knees and have the humility to say, I don't know everything. I mean, it's just, there are more things we need to know and about ourselves, and we need to just, but I think a lot of that begins with reading the lives of the saints, reading the scriptures. But you're right. You have to have your will on your side, right? It's hard to overcome your own will, right? But you have to realize God wants us to be happy, and the sacraments are avenues to happiness. So we at least have to admit that to ourselves. But I agree, there are blind spots, and we have to pray for people who are not seeing them. And I think also too, and just as maybe like a last tip to things we can do, is those of us who actually are very blessed to be in, good and happy marriages and holy marriages, be a witness to the world. I'm actually Eastern Catholic, and at divine liturgies, the icons are incensed, and then we are incensed. And why? Because we are icons to the world. We're meant to be icons to the world. And I think that the good and strong marriages need to witness that we're happy. Because I think that right now, the forces of darkness are out there saying marriage is bad. We have to say that marriage is wonderful. Marriage is good. Marriage makes you happy. And I think that is an obligation on those of us that are blessed with good marriages. We can do that.
Maybe I'll have you and Lisa on the show to talk about what it takes to have a happy long-term marriage. I've done that before.
I'm sure we would both love that.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Well, let's do that.
That'll be awesome.
You kind of answered my last question. It's a fill in the blank, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I never like people to listen to my show and go, oh, that was nice, and then have nothing. So we're going to give them some marching orders. Name one thing you'd have our listeners do differently as a result of something they heard today. Mine is read the book.
I'm hesitant to say anything in objection to that. I would say go to confession more often. If you haven't been for a long time, go back. And you know what? If you haven't been for 30, 40, 50 years and you have mortal sins in your soul, that's fine too, because you know what? God forgives those sins too. The fact of the matter is, I think a lot of people are afraid to go, oh, maybe this is maybe Father hasn't, listen, unless the priest was ordained like 2 days ago, he's already heard everything. Don't worry about going to confession. Get back to confession. Get in the state of grace. It's going to start with that. So I would say if you get one thing, I know that's maybe an odd tip because this is about the sacrament of matrimony, but realistically, it starts with going to confession. Get in the state of grace. We'll work from there. For marriage, because you need humility to look at your spouse and say, I'm sorry, I messed that up. When you bow down before God in the confessional, here's how I failed. That is the best practice for humility that is needed for your marriage. And for reconciliation. Because with reconciliation, marriage in large measure, the day-to-day being married, a lot of it is about forgiving your husband or wife. It's about forgiving yourself. We have to live a life of reconciliation. And that's one of the things that I think we've missed when we talk about, getting a divorce, and then before we're going to date. All this is like, let's reconcile. Let's see if we can reconcile with each other. Because God wants us to. That's the whole point of Jesus coming to earth, to reconcile himself to the world. Or reconcile the world to himself. It doesn't do the same thing. That's why it came, so reconciliation. We have to live that life. So I would say live sacramental lives beginning with confession. We'll go from there. Fill in the blank. I know my life. When I die, I know my life has been a success if I go to heaven. I think that'll work. I would say, it's funny. I would say when if I predecease my wife, I hope when someone says, Lisa, tell me about John, I hope she says he loved me. We'll end right there. Because that's a great ending. Okay. That's what we're here. We're here to love. Please share this show with your friends. Please buy this book, Betrayed Without a Kiss by John Clark. It is fantastic, and it is easy to read, easy to understand, and it answers so many questions, especially if you're a Catholic and the Protestants are saying, well, what about annulment? What about this? What about that? The answers are there. We have to be in this battle together. We have to fight for the sanctity of marriage. Everything in the Bible is about marriage. Everything in the Garden of Eden was about marriage. Everything in the book of Revelation is about marriage. Jesus came down. He was our spouse. We are the brides prepared for the bridegroom. God cares about marriage, and you should too. And if you don't know how to fix yours, call me. Look me up at Christine@breakfastwithbacon.com. I will, by God's grace, act as his mouthpiece to save your marriage. Because if you can do that, you can the success will ripple down to your kids and your grandchildren and your neighbors. Anyway, get the book, Betrayed Without a Kiss. What is the tagline? Defending Marriage After Years of Failed Leadership in the Church. We didn't even get there so much. By John Clark. We should. And you can get that on at tanbooks.com. TANBOOKS.com. 10 books.
And follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Rumble, YouTube. John, where can they find you?
So most of my columns are printed at the nationalcatholicregister.com. Website is ncregister.com. I've also got, things at the Magis Center, Seton Magazine, but most of my writing at present is at ncregister.com.
Excellent. So you can find him there, see a lot of his articles, get the books, and I don't know, maybe you'll see him here again. Okay, I think that's enough talking on my part. So, John, thank you so much for being on the show. You are just amazing. I love what God has called you to do in your own marriage and in your writing. So may He bless you guys tremendously in that vocation. So we'll see you here
Thank
again,
you.
right? Okay,
Yes.
I think you remember how to do this. Everybody, I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life.
Sunny side up.
Yes.